In my 45 years of being a human rights lawyer, this is the first time children of Christ have been repressed with American funds. I have urged my friends in the Ukrainian government to spare my Christian brothers and sisters.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. That was our special guest today, Bob Amsterdam. He's an international lawyer representing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which he says is being systematically destroyed by President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. We'll hear more from Bob Amsterdam in a moment, but first a quick introduction to the man himself. Bob Amsterdam's 45-year career has been extraordinary, finding himself in the middle of international events time and time again.
People are concerned about the future of democracy in this country.
His client list includes Thailand's one-time leader, billionaire Thaksin Shinawatra, Zambia's ex-president Rupiah Banda, and Uganda's opposition leader Bobi Wine, and a different kind of leader, Kim.com, king of illegal downloads.
Stop! Stop this madness! Let's all be friends!
He's also taken on the United Nations on behalf of a former employee and won, claiming the scalps of 2 deputies Director General. For that, the prestigious American Lawyer magazine awarded him Best Pro Bono Dispute 2013. But then again, the same magazine once wrote, he has a knack for attracting super-rich businessmen in emerging economies, and much of his work wouldn't be billable at most law firms.
In this world, you cannot accept assumptions, and you have to constantly be challenging those around you.
He's now in the middle of arguably his most controversial case, representing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is allegedly being persecuted by President Zelenskyy. Amsterdam puts video evidence up on his website.
It is clear that there has been an ongoing attempt to essentially decapitate the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Kiev has accused him of being a Putin puppet, but Amsterdam denies this, saying that he's represented Russian opposition figures in the past, including Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the Russian oligarch who Putin imprisoned for nearly a decade.
It's a tragedy that any individual has to face jail in order to maintain his commitment to his country.
In the past, Western media have been keen to talk to him, but appear not to want to hear allegations that President Zelenskyy, funded by the West, is persecuting Christians in Ukraine.
How did that happen?
The Ukrainians have developed the most sophisticated propaganda and information campaign I've ever seen.
Bob, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Just start, if you would, by telling us what you think is happening in Ukraine.
Well, what I know is happening is that the Rada has passed a bill, Bill 3894, to destroy the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And it is doing this with the West's eyes wide open. Our governments are accepting Zelenskyy at his word without investigating what's gone on behind him, which is the ultra-rightists are largely in power. They set up a proto-nationalist church called the OCU 5 years ago, and now they're out to completely destroy the 1,000-year-old Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And as recently as last Friday, they invaded the most sacred Lavra in Ukraine and are disturbing the remains of 1,000-year-old saints. It is complete blasphemy.
You mentioned the Rada, so that's Ukraine's version of our parliament. That's the Ukrainian
Correct.
parliament.
Yes.
Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian government will say that this law is necessary because the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has tremendous sympathies with Moscow and is providing moral and material support to Russia.
Yeah, and they say that with absolutely no evidence. It's amazing how the West has not demanded proof. There are 10,000 priests in Ukraine. They've charged something like 80 of the 10,000 with some form of political offense that are bogus. I've seen these files. I've been to Ukraine. Because I have a long history of being against Putin and the Russian government, I wouldn't take the case until I went on the ground during the war, I might add, to inspect it for myself. And I can certainly tell people that these are lies. They are fabrications. Our people, the people in this church, are on the front lines defending Ukraine while their own churches are being destroyed by the opposing church and the government, which is mindlessly attacking this 1,000-year-old organization.
Let's talk about the arrests of priests. You know, the Ukrainian government will say that they were arrested for giving away Ukrainian troops' positions to the Russians and for harboring and hiding weapons on behalf of the Russians. Are you saying that's not true?
No, I'll go further. I am saying these are constructed lies. You know, in Bronx language, I would have stronger terms. I know exactly the case you're talking about. It's about Metropolitan Arseny, a man without a stomach who has been in horrific conditions for 9 months in a Ukrainian jail. And you know what he did? During a sermon, he was angry that police had stopped parishioners from coming to his church. This man has been in conditions that are beyond horrible for 9 months because the government fabricated these charges so they could steal his church. It is beyond horrifying what they are doing to priests.
And you said that 1,500 churches have been stolen?
Yes, 1,500 churches have been stolen, not accounting the broken bones, the beaten parishioners. You know, I have to tell you that no newspaper will cover this from the West because we all accept Ukrainian lies as gospel. A government that was 4 years ago called one of the most corrupt in the world, we now allowed to lead the West in sanctioning people. It is a grotesque joke. And when the truth comes out about the billions that are stolen, about the horrors that are going on in a state run by the secret police, the SBU, I think there'll be a lot of people with egg on their faces, including our media, who deny coverage to the destruction of this church.
Well, you say that they're fabricating their evidence and they say that you're fabricating yours. A little article in the Kiev Independent here, which is anything but independent, of course, will say that the video that Tucker Carlson has shown, with your commentary, if you like, is disinformation. And they point out that the fires set on the churches were actually of different churches at different times in different locations and had nothing to do with Ukrainian security forces.
And that's, once again, part of the big lie. And I hate to say it as a big lie, but the Ukrainians are behaving in ways very similar to what we saw decades ago in terms of misinformation. They are the greatest liars on earth when it comes to what's going on. The burnt churches, go to savetheuoc.com and see them for yourself. It's not just 1 or 2 or 3. And we have videos, and we have metropolitans, members of our church, who have taken these pictures themselves. And unlike all of these media defenders of Ukraine, I've gone to Ukraine and I've met Rada members who have been beaten. Mr. Dmytruk, a member of the Rada, is now in London facing extradition because the Ukrainians tried to kill him because he opposed the passage of the bill to destroy the church.
Yeah. Well, they'll say that Dmytruk is actually, or rather was, part of the Russian bloc in Parliament, or the pro-Russian bloc in Parliament, and was essentially acting as a traitor.
Well, it's a complete lie again. Once again, you know, what I find amazing is this black and white business in Ukraine, where if you oppose the corruption and incompetence of Zelenskyy, somehow you're pro-Russian. Maybe you're actually pro-Ukrainian. Because I'll tell you, myself, for one, I want to see General Zelenskyy take power. He is the hero of Kiev. He is a competent general. So what did Zelenskyy do? He sent him to a diplomatic outpost because Zelenskyy was polling better than he was. No, we are dealing with a castle of fabrication and lies that are ongoing and that are protected by the Western media. The Guardian, the Financial Times, they have their reporters in country who are really under the control of the Ukrainian government. If I told you the stories that British journalists are sitting on because they're afraid to come out with the truth.
Why do you think that is? Why are they afraid? They clearly have taken sides.
It's
but why?
self-censorship. Well, let's be clear. Russia is the aggressor. But you need to present some context, but they never present any context. They never present the reality of what's happening inside the country. It's like the news no longer believes their news. They're advocates. And it's shameful. And I think people are starting to wake up, just like, this incident I had with the New York Times, where they called Dmitry pro-Russian, where in fact, the guy is certainly anti-Zelensky, but he risked his life to set up a brigade to fight Russia.
So there's two things going on here, Bob. One is that Ukraine is running a very sophisticated and well-funded disinformation campaign, according to you.
Yes.
And the other one is that the recipients of this campaign, the journalists, are all too willing to eat it up.
Exactly.
Okay, I can understand the Ukrainian point of view, but why are journalists so willing to take them at their word?
Because they hate Russia. People like myself, I've lost close friends to Vladimir Putin. Many of the journalists have as well. There's a deep animus there, which I understand, but you can't let it block your duties to those people who depend on you for the truth. And unfortunately, the thing that happens with the press is every time you criticize Ukraine, you must be pro-Russian. And it just doesn't occur to people that you can criticize what's going on without being pro-Russian. And that's why I personally frustrate the Ukrainians, because I'm banned from Russia. It's very hard to make that allegation.
Are you satisfied that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, your client, has sufficiently separated itself from the Moscow Patriarch, the Russian Orthodox Church?
Let's be really clear. We have independent evidence. We have independent religious experts from Germany, Catholics, who are experts in the Ukrainian church, who have given us testimonies to confirm this. And let me say something for your audience. Under international law, there is no possible way to ban a church, even if they were sympathetic to Russia. It's illegal. I would say it's criminal.
At times of war even?
This is so important to understand. Even in times of war. In times of war, particularly, you don't ban a church. A great teacher of this was Joseph Stalin, who even after the Bolsheviks had all but destroyed the Orthodox Church in Russia, brought it back during the war, because you don't take the spiritual foundations of a country apart during war. And that's one of the lessons for Zelenskyy. This divisions within his own country are something that he's doing, and for a very simple, basic political reason. He is dominated now by the ultra-right because his base of power was in the Donbass, who can't vote. So he is now appealing to the ultra-rightists we've all been worried about taking power in Ukraine.
And the ultra-right are prejudiced against Russians and any Russian influence.
Prejudiced. They're basically neo-Nazis. And by the way, well documented in the New York Times before the war, now no longer covered.
Yeah. Well, Kiev will say that the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is still on the synod of the Russian Orthodox Church, and that is just one indicator that a link still exists.
Well, this is very amusing. He has no choice. He has tried to get off, but the Russians, of course, will not change their own synod. They won't take him off. He has no power over the Russian church. You can't blame him. He has no ability to control whether or not he's on or off. He has denounced the invasion. He's done everything he can. They have denounced Ruski Mir, the Russian world. They've denounced all of it, and to the satisfaction of every theologian in the world. But the bottom line is the Ukrainians want these churches. They want their national church that deifies Ukrainians. They want that to be the only church in the country. And it's shameful and it's wrong. And Ukraine is the farthest thing from a democracy you can imagine. There's no free media. There are no political parties opposing Zelenskyy. And of course, it's a secret police state run by an organization called the SBU, who use criminal charges against the church taken right from the playbook of the Bolsheviks. In fact, this inspection going on in the Lavra is exactly what the Bolsheviks used to do to churches.
You've posted many videos on X and elsewhere
Yes.
showing churches being vandalized, desecrated, and showing congregations and priests being beaten up brutally. And you said, I presume you think that that's being done by the Ukrainian security services.
Well, I know it's being done by the security service.
How do you know?
I went there. I interviewed, again, I didn't take anybody's word for it.
Yeah.
I went to those churches, I interviewed the priests, and to be frank with you, even on Sunday, I went to all the churches I could to try to see who were in attendance. The churches that had been recently taken over, there were very few parishioners there. The UOC churches that were remaining were full.
One of the most high-profile cases was in October 2024 from Cherkasy. And apparently the priest there was very pro-Russian, very pro-Moscow Patriarch Kirill. And that is why it was the local residents that got angry and created a violent scene, not the security services. It's the local residents who are fed up with the church supporting Russia.
I'm laughing because I know that priest. I interviewed that priest. That priest was beaten up by the security services 9 months before Cherkasy. That's a complete lie.
So this is Metropolitan Feodosy?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I spoke to him 2 days ago. This is rubbish. He addressed the United Nations concerning these issues. He's a Ukrainian. In fact, one of the things the Ukrainians are doing is they're taking people like Feodosy hostage, and they're using them to barter to get back Ukrainian troops. It's outrageous.
That allegation is written up in the Carnegie Endowment for Peace. I don't know what you think about them, but this is what they think about you. They say that the UOC Synod has officially hired Bob Amsterdam, whose statements are only escalating tensions. These tensions between the UOC and the Ukrainian state are turning into an anti-Ukrainian church in the eyes of many Ukrainians and worsening the already difficult position of the UOC inside the country. They're putting it at your door.
Well, look, if you read the whole report, it's actually well balanced.
Yeah.
So I don't want, I mean, they say in that report essentially that I'm right. And if you read the report, there are other parts of it which acknowledge
Absolutely.
What I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah, they give me way too much credit. They basically make it appear as if I'm coming between Ukraine and Russia in respect to the war. What people don't like is that there is a voice in the West that isn't pro-Zelensky, that I am not throwing myself at the feet of this paper tiger, and I'm not. I think what he's done for his country is shameful. I applaud what he did during the first week. I think that was great, but there never should have been a first week. He was elected as a peace candidate, and he's betrayed his country, and he's betrayed the West. And in a way, the West has betrayed him because they made false promises, and they have not followed through. And I believe Ukraine's in a terrible situation because they counted on the West in a way to save them once they didn't negotiate when they had a much stronger hand, frankly, than they have today.
So just to be sure, you're saying that this violence against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is Zelensky trying to appease the far right in his country so that he can hold on to power?
Yes, that's one of the factors. But let me be clear. This new church is only 5 years old. So all of these allegations about sympathies or whatnot, they've been around for a while. They've been around since 2014 because you need to remember in 2014, there are many in the country that believe it was a coup, that do not believe it was a glorious revolution, that believe, in fact, the president, who, it's hard to praise Yanukovych, but that he was illegally deposed. And they put a lot of the reason for today's war in what they view as a Western coup. Yeah, we never hear about that. What we need to understand is there is an alternative narrative to it, which to some extent the church gets caught up in. But the bottom line is when 2022 occurs, the church makes every break it could possibly make. And it sends its children to the front.
And it denounced the invasion immediately.
Absolutely.
So let's look at this parallel church that you've talked about, because this is really quite unsettling. It was established by Petro Poroshenko, this is Zelenskyy's predecessor, back in 2018. Why was it established at all?
It was established by him and the US Secretary of State to weaken Putin. They make the argument that our church, the UOC, was somehow a pillar, because they believe that under this Russian theory of the Russian world, any symbol of Russia needs to be destroyed. It's a sort of Leninist mentality that they impose on the church. They make the church completely political. The United States invades the spiritual realm of Ukraine, not knowing what the heck they're doing, getting in the middle of spiritual fights that had been going on for decades, because, in fairness to the other church, there had been a strong nationalist movement that dates before the Bolshevik Revolution. I acknowledge it, my church acknowledges it. Nobody makes that argument that they shouldn't exist.
How does it differ from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, this parallel church that you say was set up essentially by the United States? How does it differ, and how does it advance the American goals?
Its services are in Ukrainian. It's controlled by the presidency. It is not separate from the state. It is the state. One of the things about Zelenskyy is he's paranoid about any entity having power, and a church, to the extent it's separate from the state, is a power. I mean, the Pope has power. Church leaders have power. Well, in Ukraine, that's not allowed. It's a dictatorship at this point of Mr. Zelenskyy. And their attack is an attack on another source, an independent source of power, which Mr. Zelenskyy cannot allow.
You say it also has different religious priorities, perhaps not as Christian as the original church, but actually worshipping the revolution and Maidan.
It's much more of a nationalist church.
Right.
Everything's in Ukrainian. There's icons to Maidan. It's a nationalist church. It's a very different church. In fairness to other Christians, I think it's far more nationalist than the autocephalous churches were before 2014.
Can we look at your allegations that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is a dictator at this point? I know you've mentioned that there's no election, he has low polling numbers, he arrests political opponents, he bans the media. People will argue, how can you have an election when you don't even control all of your provinces?
Well, it's funny. I actually know some history. And in the United States, there was an election in 1864 when the United States was completely separated. And there was no technology, and there were nothing in terms of many of the states, and they still had an election. There's a reason there's no election. We all know what Zelenskyy was polling, because they were doing tons of polls before they decided there wouldn't be an election.
So the newest polls that are coming out of Kiev, according to Ukrainian pollsters, is that he's around 63%.
Oh, it's complete crap.
How do you expect Zelenskyy to hold an election when he doesn't control Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson? How can he run an election there safely? He can't even run it.
Well, again, I won't pretend to be a member of his electoral commission, but I work in many countries where conditions are difficult and they hold elections. I believe it was his duty to hold an election. And I think he has shunned that duty because of essentially the fact that he's kept martial law going and going and going, which is part of the reason he's in no hurry for a ceasefire. Because I think Mr. Zelenskyy, after a ceasefire, is a guy who has to face the music in terms of what his actual popularity is.
Bob, just a final question. Now that you have President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, do you think this will change what is happening in Ukraine, in particular to your client?
Yes, I do. I think having, with God's grace, J.D. Vance as vice president the one senator who had the courage to speak out when no one else would. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for those who believe in freedom of religion to even impact Ukraine.
You think that law will be overturned?
I believe it may be. If not immediately, I believe absolutely it will be in time.
As a precondition of further aid or protection?
I have no idea. And we don't, we've never lobbied the U.S. Legislatively. Our position has always been to simply reach out to those in the religious community to speak to the Ukrainians on the basis of morality and faith.
Bob Amsterdam, thank you so much for joining us today on The Nexus. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.